Good afternoon, good morning. Thanks all for joining us live. We are super excited for this conversation. And now that it's officially 1 Eastern, we'll go ahead and kick things off. Welcome everyone. Again, thanks for joining us. We're here from Go Vocal and Civility Localized today, and we're going to be talking about how to build equity and representativeness into your engagement projects and strategy. We'll introduce ourselves in a second, but our goal is really to help you break kind of the one-off habits of public meetings and surveys and really be more intentional and thoughtful about tailoring your engagement plans to your unique community, project goals, and internal capacity. All right. So before some intros, a couple of housekeeping items. One, we encourage you all to be very active in chat. Please do start now by saying hello. Let us know where you're calling in from. And we also encourage you to use the Q&A function throughout the entire session. So we have about 35 minutes of content for you all today. We may answer questions throughout if they seem relevant in the moment. Otherwise, we'll save at least 10 minutes at the end for questions. And the Go Vocal team is here online as well. They'll help answer questions in chat. And then also no need to take screenshots or record. We will send the recording of the session as well as slides and any resources immediately following the webinar. All right, so some quick intros. It's great to meet you all. My name is Sarah Horton. I'm the Director of North America here at Go Vocal. I lead all of our government partnerships, mostly working with municipalities, cities and towns and counties all across the US and Canada. And I'm based in Durham, North Carolina, which is how I have come to learn of Christine and Civility Localized. She does incredible work here in the Southeast. So over to you, Christine.
Hello, everyone. I'm Christine Edwards-Pitkin. I'm the founder and principal consultant at Civility Localized. We're headquartered in Charlotte, and we do most of our work here in Charlotte and across North Carolina and across the Southeast. We'd love to see if anyone else is here from North Carolina. And just a quick note, you might hear some background noise, so I'll try my best to minimize that. I'm actually traveling today, but wanted to make sure I found a quiet space to connect with you.
Awesome. Thanks, Christine. Cool. So quick background also on our two companies. So Go Vocal, for those of you who aren't familiar with our work yet, we've been in the community engagement space on the technology side for about 10 years now, so since 2015. In those 10 years, we've powered the engagement platforms of over 600 local governments worldwide, including some of the innovative names that you see here, Salt Lake City, Montgomery County, and Kansas City, which Christine is actually on her way to do some work with now. So awesome. We have a shared partner. I also just want to reiterate that we are a B Corp, so inclusive engagement is very much part of our DNA, very much actively considered in all of our partnerships and the tools that we build. And I'm excited to share kind of how we do that through a technology lens today.
Awesome. Just some quick facts about Civility Localized and who we are. So we were founded in 2018. My background is actually in local government. Before starting my firm, I worked for Mecklenburg County government, and I worked for the city of Charlotte. I've also worked with local nonprofits for about a decade. So my background is in public sector work. And we started in 2018 and really went full time in 2020. And in that time, we have worked on projects like the Arts and Culture Plan for the city of Charlotte, the Reimagining Public Safety for the city of Asheville, Mecklenburg County Rec. So you can see that we're all kind of all over the place in terms of topic area and focus area, but we have really honed in on transportation equity, land use plans, and a little bit of that social justice and racial justice work as well. So the work that we're doing in Kansas City is we're supporting their Mayor's Commission on Reparations. We also supported the Reparations Commission for the city of Asheville by doing some program management. And that's who we are. I have about a team of 5 contractors, and we also have a local ambassadors program where we hire college students and recent grads to help us with events.
Awesome. Incredibly powerful work Christine does. So if you all aren't already plugged into her newsletter and following her on LinkedIn, please do so. Lots of great resources there. All right, so let's get into kind of the meat of our content today. The first thing we're talking about is really around like why we need to make this perception shift, right? Like why is it actually important to build equity and representativeness into our engagement projects, and what is the value of reporting that out once a project's over? So we'll kind of start with the overarching how things are today. Many governments that we partner with originally are only narrowly defining engagement success in terms of volume. So you see a lot like, oh, we got X hundred of ideas submitted, or X percentage of residents took the survey. And while that's great, and definitely that energy and buzz is something to be celebrated, it doesn't tell the full story or answer who we actually heard from. And that is very important, of course, right? When selling the outcome or decision of a project. So again, we want to make sure that we find ways that we are really trying to truly reach a cross section of our community. And while we want to reach high numbers, we want to make sure that that feedback is representative from the very beginning. And again, the reason why we do that is really we want to avoid risks of creating an echo chamber. We're only considering the loudest or most available voices and drowning out those who might be hard to reach or aren't actively engaged with the government or the city already. So we wanted to start with a quick poll to kind of understand your context as well. So let me go ahead and launch that. Let's see if I could figure it out here on Zoom. Here we go. All right, so we want to know, and Christine, maybe you can give me a nod. Are you seeing this poll? Okay, awesome. In your last engagement projects, to what extent would you say that the voices that participated were truly representative of the whole community? We'll give you just 30 seconds. Awesome. All right. Yeah, so we can see here a lot of partially, some unsure, not at all. Notably, no one answered very much. I think that's very common. So thank y'all for that transparency and sharing those results there. All right. So based on that, I think we all know and can agree that doing this poorly, not reaching a truly cross-sectional group of folks is costly, not just from erosion of community trust perspective, but also financially. I came across a study recently from OECD. They released a study that showed that there's actually a 20 to 30% cost increase per project if decisions are made with incomplete knowledge, or if projects can be delayed or have poor policy outcomes. So I think an important stat you could bring to your team as you're trying to get buy-in around why tracking this is important. All right. So now that we've established like volume isn't the only thing we should be tracking, and that it has the risk to lead to inequitable processes, how do we fix that? And that's something that, in working with Christine and Civility Localized, there is this clear three-part framework that we want to share with you all. And we think that this will allow you to really ensure that your projects help you reflect the needs of the entire community. So this framework in itself implies making a shift from reactive engagement, which is often still very much the standard, to more proactive engagement. So we're talking about intentional strategic efforts to reach those communities that might not already be coming to you, and being proactive about including those missing perspectives. So we like to say shift focus from counting voices to making every voice count, which is kind of cheesy, but true. So the first step is one, mapping your community. If you all are working in local government, you're doing this day to day, you know better than we will, or any outside consultant, who it is that you need to hear from and who you are not traditionally hearing from. So making sure that you're proactively identifying those folks before the conversation starts. And then from there, you want to be able to track your representation, who's participating in real time, which is a key important factor. And then from there, you want to be able to adjust your outreach. So being dynamic enough throughout the engagement phases that you're continuously adapting your strategy, able to pivot and make sure that you're reaching those missing voices. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to Christine, who's an expert in this work in particular.
Great, thank you. I think what Sarah said is so important, especially about projects actually cost more when the engagement is, not done thoroughly the first time. And I just want to, pinpoint that because how many of y'all, let me know in the chat, have you ever had to go back out and do additional engagement, right? At the end of an engagement period because people will say, "Oh, I didn't even know about this. This is my first time hearing about this," right? You've got your whole report done, you're presenting it to leadership, and then you've got folks in the community that'll say, "Oh, I didn't even know this was going on," right? So when you ask the right questions ahead of time, and I'm sure that, we're all doing our best to ask those questions, but when you are intentional about mapping those stakeholders and mapping that community, it will reduce the likelihood that you'll have to come back out and spend additional resources doing engagement. Yep, I see some comments in the chat. So this slide goes over 5 important strategies for stakeholder mapping, 5 important steps. So the first step is to define that engagement footprint, that boundary in the area of influence. Is this engagement just neighborhood wide? Does it just impact a certain geography or a certain audience, or is it citywide or the entire region, right? So you want to define that boundary and then also define what's called the area of influence. So let's say, for example, you want to work with a housing organization to provide additional resources for affordable housing. Does that housing organization focus on one neighborhood or one geography, or is it citywide, right? So really hone in on these questions. A lot of times when it comes to stakeholder mapping or even just planning your engagement, we go straight to date, time, location. All right, we're going to do these public meetings on this date. We're going to launch this survey on this date. But I implore you all to work with your clients and work with your leadership to actually jot this down and actually document this process of defining the footprint and defining that area of influence before setting that date, time, and location. Okay, gathering demographic data and using it to draft your stakeholder lists. So using that census data to look at the geographic region so that you can draft a stakeholder list based off of that neighborhood boundary or based off of that municipal boundary, but also using demographic data can help you understand the latest information about the makeup of your community. Are there more young people in your community than the last time that you did engagement? Are there more diverse community members? So really revisiting each time the makeup of your community rather than making assumptions, right? Kind of going based off of what like, oh, I know that this area of my community has a large, let's say, Latinx population. That's just something that you know about your community. But let's go back in and double check and just make sure that we're checking that demographic information. Identify resource gaps in the engagement area. So again, not necessarily going based off of assumptions of, well, in the past, there's been this resource gap. Let's make sure that we have that conversation. And that kind of goes to that question that's up in the right-hand corner. Are you asking the right questions? All right, let me pause there. And I'm gonna actually pull up my notes here because there's a couple of questions that I've learned in my work that I want to share with y'all. For example, who are the key community leaders or influencers, right? Which community organizations are already active in the area? What departments in your city or your municipality have already been involved in this area, right? So thinking about that cross-functional or cross-departmental communication that needs to happen. If you work in a community where maybe the water department has been out frequently, maybe that's one of those questions to ask when you're planning your engagement. So, question for the chat. What other questions or considerations should you consider prior to your engagement? Let's see. I'm going to put that in the chat. What other questions or consideration? And then I see the questions here, and we'll definitely have time to get to your questions. All right. Number 4, reducing barriers. Providing what's needed. So when you think about those resource gaps, you can start to talk about how to reduce the barriers for what's needed for your engagement. Asking for and putting on your registration forms. Do you need translation services? What is the most relevant language that's used, right? What's the word I'm looking for? The most relevant, the most relevant language that's used in the area. Again, you don't want to make assumptions. You can actually ask that question ahead of time on your registration forms, or just reaching out to a translation provider, a live interpreter, and saying, hey, we're just going to have you guys on hand. We might not need live interpretation, but just in case. Transportation, childcare, and maybe even compensation, right? And then last but not least, your shared goals. Shared goals checkpoint. This is very important. You're going to want to make sure that this project is both wanted and needed by the community members. So a lot of times we work with this idea that the community needs the certain projects that we're doing. And I'll get into a couple of case studies, and they want the things that are coming to the community. But what does consensus look like if those shared goals are not met? So if we're doing a land use plan, a long-term plan, we know that these things need to happen, right? But what does consensus look like if those shared goals are not met, or if people are not, they don't desire what it is that we're planning for the community? So I think just having that conversation up front about, okay, what if this gets uncomfortable, right? What happens, how do we respond to that? And I love the conversation that's going on in the chat. We'll go to the next slide. All right. So here is a case study that we completed in, I think this was between 2023 and 2024. So I worked with our planning organization here in Charlotte called the CRTPO, the Charlotte Regional Planning Organization, Transportation Planning Organization. And they had a 2055 MTP, which is the Metropolitan Transportation Plan. So I worked with an engineering firm. A lot of times my company partners with larger engineering firms to expand their engagement capacity and help them communicate projects and deliver on projects, right? So they had completed a survey in the region, but they found in the survey that more than 80% of the responses came from 3 zip codes. And the survey responses were quite, they all kind of looked the same, and they were lacking in diversity from certain demographics. So we were brought on to host, the goal was to do 100, to really reach about 100 people. And we ended up reaching about 60, but I thought that we had really great conversations because these were small group conversations in these focus groups. And what was really important, what I want you all to take away here, is that the stakeholders for this MTP were just so unique because it covered 3 counties. So this CRTPO region is a 3-county region. You have Iredell County, Mecklenburg County, and Union County, and it's depicted in that graphic right there. So what was unique is that we had to engage diverse stakeholders within a 3-county region, specifically marginalized stakeholders, Black and Brown communities, communities with lower income, communities with lower educational attainment. So what that looked like was literally getting on the phone and calling housing organizations, calling nonprofit service providers, and talking to them about inviting their members and their constituents to come to these focus groups. Each participant in the focus group did receive compensation, and we had 62% of participants were from the marginalized racial demographics, and then 76% of participants were from marginalized gender demographics. So we were very intentional about diversifying these focus groups. And the one thing about this, the MTP, is that we so often do not get to have these conversations. You don't just get to pop in, you know, you don't get to have a conversation about your roadway plans. And so the folks that went to these focus groups, for a lot of them, it was their first time talking about their travel behaviors and their community behaviors. So, you know, I encourage you all to just really be intentional about that. Okay, next slide. So this case study is for a very different kind of project. It still is a transportation project, but the stakeholders for this project were, again, very different. And the takeaway for this is that I don't want us to, as engagement professionals, to make assumptions, right, about the audiences that we're serving. So as you can see here on the slide, I worked with CATS, Charlotte Area Transit System, in doing engagement on the Red Line Commuter Rail project. And this is just an exciting project, got a lot of media attention, and it is a 25-mile, well, 20-plus mile commuter rail line that goes from uptown Charlotte through up to Iredell County. And so you go into this thinking that everyone is on board, right? The train is like full steam ahead, right? So we had all of the train puns for this project. And the takeaway here is that even though we didn't have to beg people to come to the table, we had to set aside our assumptions that everyone was going to be on board with this. And some of the things that we heard were that there were some communities that were really worried about displacement. And there were some key employers that were worried about how this would impact their workers as well. And so that was some feedback that we had to maintain, and working along with media to make sure that we were educating folks about what commuter rail is and how it's different from a light rail system that we have in Charlotte. Last takeaway here is in Charlotte. I don't know if you've been following along with the news, but we did just we passed a big transportation bond, which draws upon a sales tax. And so it was voted on in November last week, and it passed. But the takeaway is that there were certain precincts in Northern Mecklenburg that voted against, right? Even though it passed overall. And when you zoom in, the precincts that voted against were the same communities that were had concerns during the engagement period in 2020. So I just want to encourage you all to not make assumptions and just really be in tune and zoom in and be in tune with those conversations. All right, next slide.
Awesome. That was super helpful, Christine. And I love how you kind of zoomed in from like really high level strategic advice to also super practical, and really driving home, you know, how to design inclusive processes from the beginning. Something as simple as a registration form that asks what folks need to be able to participate. I love that. So I did notice in the chat, and I figured now would be a good time to surface some of these. If you have any immediate responses to how to include or engage folks who might be cynical, maybe they've had some misinformation that they've heard about a project that's controversial, for example, how to engage them. And then if you have any strategies for engaging seniors or those who are not engaging because of digital divide or digital literacy.
So I think to that first question about responding to cynics or people that just don't believe the information, I think that posting the facts of the project or maybe having a one-page information sheet or having a one-page FAQ document and having that somewhere that posted that you can reference and that staff can reference continuously. I mean, there's only so much you can do. But I think that just documenting it and have everyone on your staff on board with those talking points, and I won't even say talking points, I will say the facts of the project, what this project will do and what it won't do. And just have everyone be well versed on that has been extremely helpful. Even using a tool like Go Vocal, right? And posting that on the project site, I think could be really helpful. The next question was about seniors and folks that don't use the internet or people that don't have digital access. Sometimes there is a cost in order to reach them because it could mean using the mail or other outreach methods. I think that's very true. I think that's really true. Sometimes you do have to consider the cost of doing some more grassroots or on the ground outreach. One strategy that I found helpful that's low cost is yard signs. Sometimes having a yard sign, if it is for an event, I think gets a lot of attention if it's foot traffic or even car traffic. People can see those yard signs from the car as well safely, and maybe having a QR code for the folks that see the yard sign on foot. If you have the budget, then sure you can do mailers. But I mean, look at doing yard signs and partnering with like a YMCA or partnering with a place that has really high foot traffic so you can place those yard signs.
That is a hot tip. I wrote that down for future. I think Go Vocal clients will love that. Something I wanted to build on in regard to cynics, because obviously we all know we are engaging in quite a polarized environment. There is a beauty in having more open-ended, publicly visible or transparent community voices. So if you contrast that to feedback that's gathered exclusively through a survey, residents in your community who might be cynical don't have the benefit of being able to read or see or have visibility into other community members' experiences. And if there's low trust in government or they don't trust the municipality for whatever reason, relying on the staff to kind of consolidate and issue that report and say this is what they heard. Sometimes that's not as believable as reading directly from someone's voice on the platform through more like an open ideation type method. So we'll get to that a bit. I think it's a good segue into our next section, which is around really how do we track representativeness and what are some of the methods that can help us kind of boost this inclusion throughout our processes. So let me skip forward a bit here. Okay, so typically a project, how we think about equity and inclusion and how we measure that and report it out is pretty linear, right? So we think about, we start, we set our project goals, we launch, we have our phases of engagement, we collect our data, and then at the end, we analyze who we've reached. The critical flaw in that, of course, is that you're finding out a bit too late to actually make any meaningful changes or adjustments. So while Christine mentioned the importance of really being strategic at the beginning and setting out, as you embark on your engagement, you may learn things as you go, and you want to make sure that you have that real-time data to be able to adjust that strategy, maybe recalibrate goals. So we do suggest a new model that's a little bit more real-time, iterative, giving you live benchmarking data, comparing your actual census data or community data to your participation data. And the idea there is, of course, that you're able to tweak live and have better engagement. All right. So what could this look like? I'll skip ahead here. We have some animations. Checking for representation during the project, making sure that as you're going, you can see in real time, hey, we're not reaching seniors, or we're not actually reaching single young folks or our student population, for example. And I will say this seems obvious, so if this is a clear solution, why isn't everyone already operating like this? And I think it's all about resources, right? Like I saw a question in the chat or a comment around speed and just how costly it is to do all of the things we want to do well. And so sometimes we do have to make sacrifices from a resourcing perspective. I think it's really cool to share with you all today that there are tools available, GoVocal obviously being one of them, that makes this a little bit more practical for you. So one of the ways that we do this with our clients is through our representative dashboard. Really practically, during your setup, you can site-wide gather census data and say, all right, here's our affected population. We know that we want to gather demographics on gender, age, and area. Maybe that's district, neighborhood, or zip code, and be able to track that for all of our engagement projects, see where we're coming from. Of course, the kicker here is you want to balance data integrity and inclusion data with the participant experience. So you don't want to ask long lists of question, or maybe asking education or income level will turn folks off to giving that info. So being really strategic about what you're collecting, why you're collecting it, and then when in the process you're asking for it. All right. So we're talking a little bit more about the methods. We talked a little bit about kind of contrasting surveys or closed-ended feedback with open ideas, for example. But really, inclusion is not just a matter of trying harder. It's really a factor of making sure that you are making the process as inclusive and equitable as possible. So some of the ways practically that you can do that is one, making sure that your tools, your processes, your meetings, those are accessible, right? Like making sure that the participant experience is smooth, whatever you're putting before them is easy to use, it's an enjoyable experience. Then also, we'd be remiss not to mention language inclusion. A lot of local government partners that we work with are relying less on kind of that Google Translate in the browser and really investing in native auto translation tools like Weglot, something we integrate with on all of our platforms. So making sure that it's as close to native translation as possible if it is automated. The second would be blending your engagement methods. So not just going full digital or full offline, really being strategic about running those things in parallel or consecutively so that you really have kind of that rich participation that comes from smaller group, one-on-one, face-to-face, meaningful conversations, as well as giving folks the opportunity to participate asynchronously. Um, One of the cool things that we've added to our platform over the last year has been the ability to automatically transcribe handwritten and voice-based feedback. So for those of you who are government staff in the room, you know how much time it takes after a meeting to manually transcribe what everyone said and summarize it and connect it to other tables. So it's really nice to be able to have access to that kind of tooling now. And then third, making sure that you're really solving the practical problems that prevent people from participating. And I'm actually going to bring Christine back because she shared such a cool example of how she did this with one of her projects.
Yes, so specifically about childcare, which can sometimes be a barrier for folks. So at one of our engagements, we had our feedback boards set up around the room, around the perimeter of the room, and this was a drop-in style open house feedback session. And we wanted people to come after work and be comfortable bringing their families. So what we did was in the middle of the room, we connected a couple of tables and we called that our junior planners table, right? Our junior planners area. And we set out some coloring sheets, some building blocks, and some tinkering toys for the young folks to come in and visualize and color. And we had some maps set out that were similar to the maps that their parents and their guardians were looking at, so that they could envision right alongside with us. And then that way we don't have to call it childcare because we're not hiring a childcare professional, but the young people are in the room, the kids are in the room, you can see them, they're not completely unsupervised. So that's a quick, low cost way to make your events a little bit more family friendly.
I love that. I'm going to come to your next junior planning meeting for sure. Awesome. So we're going to gain a little bit of speed here. I know we're reaching the end of our time, and I definitely want to save time for all of the great questions that are in the chat. I think one thing we want to call out here is you have to tailor your kind of mix of engagement methods to your specific community and your project goals. So if you think about engagement on these two axes, so in person and digital, and synchronous and asynchronous, depending on your goals, depending on who you're trying to reach, depending on who you're missing, you're going to want to create an approach that kind of encapsulates both or multiple of those things. And the idea there, of course, is being intentional with the methods you're selecting. And from that, you can expect more meaningful, high quality contributions from your community members. And in case you're ever unsure, which method should we go with? Should we do in person? Should we do a hybrid approach? Should we do a survey, open ideation on a map? We do have an engagement method selector quiz you can take on our blog, which we'll send the link out to. All right, one final case study from the Go Vocal side. So in January of this year, we started working with Salt Lake City, and they have done a really good job at blended engagement and focusing really on inclusion and reaching folks that they have historically missed. And I think a good example of this was for very like neighborhood specific, street specific project around a park called Fairmont Park. And they did a really good job at reaching folks who lived across the park perimeter or visited the park. So, as you know, it's kind of hard to do that with a spray and pray approach. Maybe just sending out an email blast newsletter. You're not necessarily going to reach the folks that you need to hear from for such a local neighborhood project. So some of the tactics that they did that I thought were really interesting. I'm curious if they did yard signs, but I know they did park signs, of course. So QR codes throughout the park, as well as kind of like a big sandwich board explaining the project and the vision. They also did targeted surveys. So they did mailers or door hangers with QR codes. So only folks who lived in that specific project area could access the survey or see that project page on the platform. So kind of gated participation to ensure that you're really hearing only from the voices that you need to. So you can see here, great response, about 500 participants, and this project is ongoing. So we can send the link out if y'all want to check it out. All right, so that brings us to the end of the content that we had prepared for you all. We'd love to open up the conversation and answer some of these questions. So let me pull up the chat, and then also Go Vocal team, if we had any in the Q&A specifically, do unmute and ask those too. Okay, so let's talk about speed. And I know, Christine, you have a hard stop at 45, so we'll make this quick. Warren asks, engagement takes time. How do we speed up engagement without sacrificing quality? Which is a great question.
I think, and I was thinking about this while we were talking. So I think maybe getting comfortable with opening up your survey a little early and then leaving the survey open a little bit longer, because that way you're maximizing that engagement period with a survey, and then you can layer on top those events, whether it's an in-person or a virtual event, on top of the survey. So yeah, virtual, in-person, and just kind of getting comfortable with let's keep it open a little bit longer so that we can use the most of that time.
Yeah, I'll add to that too. And we didn't really touch on AI tools, but Obviously, you can use AI now as government staff, either within a platform or whether it's your personal chat GPT to gain speed, maybe on the analysis side or the tagging and clustering side, making sense of the feedback. So you can have longer opportunities for folks for the input gathering. And you don't have to build in such long timelines for the analysis and reporting part. So that's another way that technology can support. Another question is, aren't there just people who are unengageable? This is the real hard-hitting question. What would you say to that, Christine?
I mean, at the end of the day, what's the phrase? You can lead a horse to water, but you can't force them to drink. I think that you really want to make sure that people are informed at the very least. And I don't know if y'all are familiar with the IAP2 public participation spectrum. So engagement can go from a spectrum from inform to empower. So you're not going to get everyone all the way up to the empower level, but at the very least, folks are going to be informed. And I know that we don't like to check the box on engagement, but you cannot worry about the people that are just not coming to the table. The more that you provide opportunities to get informed and get involved, that's the best that you can do. And I agree, there are sometimes unengageable people.
Yes, retweet. That was an amazing answer. Okay. Um, Lisa from Stantec, thanks for joining. You also had a suggestion in here. We review media, so print online to find out what people are talking about and ID any trusted messengers and opinion leaders. So I think this is around being able to identify community members, stakeholders who can help amplify the message. Lisa or Christine, anything you'd like to add or double click on in that?
Not in particular. I think that was a really good point. Reviewing media, monitoring media, whenever announcements are put out or prior to engagement. I think that was a really good point.
Awesome. All right. We have time for, I think, one more question. Any other questions? If so, drop them in the chat. Ah, okay. I think I missed one actually. So there's one that says how to attract people who are kind of that middle majority that you might not be hearing from, as opposed to the people who typically show up, which are the ones that are opposed. Do you have anything for that, Christine?
Um, I would I would want to know a little bit more. When you say the people who are kind of middle of the road or they don't usually show up, do we know who they are? Do we know when we look at the gaps in engagement, like looking at your previous engagement, what zip codes were not on the sign-in sheet? What zip codes and what areas are not represented in your survey, and then going out proactively, maybe reaching out to an organization that services that area, partnering with them and saying, hey, I think we might have missed this community in our last time that we were out here. Would you be open to collaborating on a virtual session? So literally figuring out who they are and doing that proactive outreach to get in front of them, whether it's in a virtual session or a door hanger or a flyer or something like that.
Mhm. Love that. Awesome. We'll go ahead and end on that great note. I just wanted to say thank you to Christine for all of the fabulous insights, strategic, practical, super rich. We'll make sure to send out this recording and the slides to all of you. Thank you so much for joining, everyone, and we wish you good luck with your equitable engagement efforts. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you all.
Bye.